Welcome to America's Heroes Group. My name is Jennifer-Ruth Green, and it's an honor to be here with you tonight on a Wednesday night. Really excited to be here and just share a little bit tonight. I want to talk about a charge for unity in a changing world. I was thinking about the topic and really felt like there was a clear need for us to connect as humans in a space where things are different. We just experienced a peaceful transfer of power, which is exciting. That doesn't always happen across the world, but we in the United States were able to experience that, and that's great. But the people have spoken, and the transition of power has transferred ideology to ideology. And we have two political parties in America, two main political parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. And Democrat power has just shifted to Republican power across the branches of our government. And that has created a lot of change. And in this time of change, our country seems to be a bit divided. And when we look at the statistics and the numbers, as far as voting goes, you have about half of the country who supports our current president. And you have about half of the country who is a bit frustrated and angry about the fact that our current president is our current president. And so that means 1 out of every 2 people, as we look around our country, look around our environments, look around our neighborhoods, are really processing that they're going to have a difficult time across the next 4 years. And that's a reality that we as leaders need to be aware of. My name is Jennifer-Ruth Green, and I am the founder and CEO of Battle Proven Leadership. And at Battle Proven Leadership, we take the opportunity to build new and rising leaders as we help corporations, as we help people to grow into these spaces where they can have access and influence. And so we talk through practical training tips and create opportunities for people to know how to effectively just jump right into the leadership seat once they have the position and ultimately earn the opportunity to lead the people that they're with. And so one of the things that I think is important for us as leaders is to understand and learn how to read a room. In this particular situation, when we talk about the change and transition of power, specifically in the United States right now that we're experiencing, and we look around the room, we see that about 1 out of every 2 people is not pleased with the way the country has decided. But at the end of the day, living in this democratic republic, the country has spoken, the voters have spoken, and through our electoral college, through the confirmation of the Senate, we have new leadership. And that is something that we as leaders have to understand. And although we are in a place where there's discord, as leaders, we are called to lead. And we cannot simply abdicate our responsibility because it's hard. And we can't abdicate our humanity because there are others who disagree with us. We have to be able to understand how to work in a changing environment, how to lead in a changing environment, and how to help people be impactful. So how do we move forward and unite, but also how do we move forward and create and support change? And I don't just mean the change that has started or the change that has started a situation in our current, for example, the administration itself. We want to support the administration. We want to provide opportunities for America as a whole to do well as leaders. But I think there's a need to support change by changing the environment that we rest in. So there's an internal change that needs to happen in order to accept the outcomes if we don't necessarily agree with them. There's a change that has to happen as a leader to lead people who think differently than you. So there are a change of mindsets. But if there's something that you feel as a leader needs to be different, then we have to be able to know how to externally create change within the confines of the environment that we're sitting in. And those are some of the things we want to talk about tonight. Just 4 short lessons tonight that hopefully you can take back, look at, and have a really clear vision for how to be impactful in this space. I had the honor and privilege to attend and graduate from the United States Air Force Academy. It's located in Colorado Springs, and it's a 4-year training institution where the United States Air Force has a curriculum focused on building leaders, building the world's best air and space force leaders. And so during that time of our course training, we are responsible for all of our academics, and we have a highly impacted or a high engineering training program. So whether that's kind of engineering, aeronautical, astronautical, civil. We had a lot of foreign language classes. We had English, just a broad spectrum of education to help us be more impactful in our space. And so sometimes we joked, we would say we were so well-rounded, we were pointless because we were jacks of all trades, but masters of none. But in that training, during that time, we also had, beyond academics, we had physical training, so PE classes and other things like that. And we had military training. Obviously, every day we had to wear uniforms and things like that. But our freshman year, we went through basic training, and that's where you learn how to fold your clothes and salute smartly and wear your uniform and all of those things. You learn how to march. You learn how to do all of the things that military members, that help build the discipline in that space. And one of the things that was required of us was a course called Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape, SEER training. And without going too deep into it, my classmates and I spent multiple weeks in the mountains of Colorado after being trained by professional survival experts in the military. And they left us out there with scarce food resources and the responsibility to evade and not get caught in the middle of the woods. And so we had to use all of our training, all of our skills, camouflage paint on our faces, and go through these environments to basically figure out how to exist in a warfare environment and not get caught if that was the objective. Obviously, if we wanted to have survival training and we were waiting to get picked up by friendly forces, we wanted to be in a posture where we could create an environment for us to be able to do well. So at the end of the day, it was a really unique opportunity for us. And I learned a lot through that particular training. And one of the things that was quite unique was learning more about a man named Lance Sijan. Lance Sijan was a captain who was a United States Air Force Academy grad and the first and only, to my knowledge, Medal of Honor winner. He was flying the F-4, which is a fighter jet. He was flying it in Vietnam after graduating from the academy. And he ended up having a malfunction with knobs, and his plane ultimately went down. And then when it went down into the jungle, for about 2 days, he had loose communications, not very clear, not very common, but communications with friendly forces. And during that time, forces were sent to rescue him, and a couple of people tried, but it was difficult to get to him in the middle of the jungle. But in his crash, he suffered a fractured skull, a mangled right hand, and he had a compound fracture in his left leg. So he could barely move, but he was able to scoot along. And in this scooting, he scooted and evaded enemy capture for 46 days. 46 days. And that was his survival story. He ultimately got captured, and at the age of 25, ended up succumbing to his injuries at the Hanoi Hilton, and ended up passing away. But he was an exemplar for the class of 2002 at the Air Force Academy. And the exemplar is somebody who exemplifies the traits that your classmates want to exhibit. And there was tenacity, there was bravery, there was a certain skill and airmanship in his ability to operate and land and be alive after a plane crash. And for all of these reasons, they chose him as their exemplar. And so when you choose someone as an exemplar, you wear their name, their last name on a patch. Your entire class does. You invite their family to come out, and you have a dinner with them, and you spend time and connect and honor their airman or their service member. And so it was a really interesting time to learn about kind of the warrior ethos that Lance P. Sijan, Captain Sijan, exhibited. And not only did the class of 2002 make them their exemplar, but also there is a dorm, a building named at the Air Force Academy after him based on, these heroic feats. One of the things that I find interesting about him was that he, Captain Sijan, after he was captured and was in the Hanoi Hilton, he even escaped with all of his injuries. He escaped and he left, and he was captured after several hours, recaptured by the Vietnamese. And this man was amazing. And why do I tell you about Lance P. Sijan? Not only because he was an amazing person, but I think the tenacity that he brought and the willingness that he brought to his environment to commit to change, to commit to say, hey, my circumstances do not dictate my outcome. My circumstances do not dictate my opportunities. My circumstances do not dictate the rest of my life. He was committed to creating change in the environment that he was in. And he said, these are my circumstances, but they don't have to stay that way. And so a couple of lessons that I learned from studying POWs, specifically in Vietnam, are kind of the basis and foundation of what I want to talk about tonight. 4 quick lessons, and we'll go over them pretty simply as far as leadership goes. And then there are a couple more stories that I'd like to share. But the first thing is commit to finishing strong. Commit to finishing strong. When we look at Captain Sijan, after he received grave injuries, after he tried to call for 2 days and was able to see rescue forces come in and look at him, and he could see them and he could hear them, and he knew at certain times that the anti-aircraft fire that the enemy forces were providing, and headed towards and targeting the people who were rescuing him, they were coming in to rescue him, and he was trying to be strategic about when he could come out of the jungle and attempt to be rescued and be visible, but he didn't want to put other people in harm's way. So he was balancing his own personal need for survival, but also the colleagues and the fellow service members who were coming to rescue him, balancing their needs as well in his mind. And so when we think about his commitment, he didn't just lay down, roll over, and say, this is it, I can do nothing else. Again, I remind you, he had a fractured skull, a mangled right hand, and a compound fracture in his left leg. And he scooted himself to say, how can I get to food? How can I get rescued? How can I communicate? How can I evade? And he did all of this for 46 days. Over 6 weeks, the man said, I am going to survive. And he said, my circumstances do not dictate the outcomes. My environment is not going to take hold of me. And so he said, regardless of what the environment has done, I am going to keep moving. And so the fact that Lance P. Sijan was committed to finishing strong is a lesson for us in great change. Captain Sijan's experiences changed, but you know what didn't change? His tenacity and willingness to finish strong. And I admire that about him. And when we look at the difficulties that we're facing and the change that we see, commit to finishing strong. You can't just roll over and say, it's different, I don't like it, I can't do anything about it. Commit to finishing strong. The summer between my freshman and sophomore year at the Air Force Academy, we were recognizing the impacts of September 11th. September 11th, I was a freshman at the Air Force Academy. And during that time, our world changed. Not just my immediate circumstances, but my world changed. We had a pretty open campus prior to September 11th, but that specific day, everything changed. We went on lockdown. We had 24-hour guards at multiple doors. We only had 1 or 2 entry points. We had gates put up everywhere. We were not able to, we had to control our wear of civilian clothes. And it was a really big deal because we had to figure out how we could operate in our new circumstances. The world at large had changed. Flying had changed. The posture of America had changed on a world stage. We were at war in 2002. 2001, we were operating under executive order. Congress had given, the president the opportunity to have broader authorities. And so we had set troops out, but in 2002, we effectively declared war. And so the war on terror began. And when we look at that circumstance, here we are as 19-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 18 to 23, and we're looking at the world from a different perspective. And we know that as soon as we graduate, we are going into combat. There is no option. This is a long-standing war, and we knew that we hadn't found our enemies. We knew that we had a lot of work to do. We knew that we were trying to neutralize threats, and we knew that at the end of our graduation, we would be in a war zone. And so the summer between my freshman and sophomore year, my circumstances were different than they were a year prior. And so I don't know what drove me to this. I can't say that I was incredibly mature. I can't say that I was incredibly focused. I was just curious. But I remember spending a summer reading about POW experiences. And when I was little, I found a book, and it was called Great Escapes of World War II. And I saw a book that had, talked about escape, where there were 3 tunnels built in Germany, Tom, Dick, and Harry, and where several POWs were able to get out and escape. There are a couple movies made about it, The Great Escape. And it was just a really interesting book to me. Small stories and probably about 10 pages on this particular escape. So I remember thinking, wow, the POW experience. So I started looking and found a lot of literature on the POW experience in Vietnam. And I realized that some people were there for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. People sat in these dark, dank rooms with rarely, if ever, any contact with fellow service members. They didn't have clear opportunities to communicate with one another openly. They had horrible living conditions, whether it was lice-filled or whether it was bugs or whether it was food that had been, that was not sanitary, and food that was provided in meager portions. And people were starving, and they were bony. And the intent of the enemy was to get them to look at America and say that America was horrible. And they wanted them to go on camera. They wanted them to say that and denounce, the American way of life. And there's a famous story where serving as POWs, they had gotten several members of the military to be willing to sit for a press conference. And they had given them prefabricated answers to say and to read. Basically, our captors are treating us well. The Vietnamese are great. We're well taken care of. And then there was a POW who got the chance to be on this I was going to say live stream, but on this show, this propaganda effort. And while on TV, he began to use Morse code, and he began to blink Morse code, long, short, short, long, short, short, with his blinks, and convey a message, basically telling the American military and the American public that the situation was dire, and providing information about the POW camp. And in the midst of a hard time, in the midst of a changing environment, he said, I am not going to sit here and allow my environment to dictate my circumstances. I am going to figure out a way to promote change. I'm going to figure out a way to communicate the needs that I have. And so one of the things that I think is a second point that I'd love to share about is kind of owning your own patch of grass. So number one, we talked about commit to finishing strong. Number two, own your own patch of grass. This man was isolated most of the time, didn't have a lot of opportunity to do anything other than get physically beaten, get starved, be isolated, and have this difficult circumstances. But you know what he said? He said, what can I do? What can I do within the confines of my environment, within the confines of the rules? How can I convey my message, and how can I create change? And I couldn't tell you the man's name, and I apologize for not having that tonight. But one thing that was very clear was that he did not roll over and say, I can't do anything. You know what he said? He said, this is my patch of grass. I have one chance. I have one opportunity. This is what I can do. I can blink. I can blink in Morse code. And if they give me the opportunity, so help me, that's what I'm going to do. And he fought for the opportunity to get the chance to share his truth with the world. And that's exactly what he did. And I appreciate and respect the fact that he owned his patch of grass and said, hey, it's not someone else's opportunity. It's not someone else's responsibility. It is mine, and I'm going to be the one to take it. And he stood up and said, I'm going to own my patch of grass. So number one, commit to finishing strong. Number two, own your patch of grass. Number three, I would say believe in the people around you. There's a Major Fred Cherry. He was a pilot. He was the highest ranking African-American POW that was captured in the Vietnam War. And he was largely quiet about his POW experience after he got out of Vietnam. And in fact, when the POWs were released, there were 191 POWs that were released successfully from the Hanoi Hilton when the Vietnam conflict was declared, to be over. And so Major Fred Cherry, as an African-American, he got a lot of attention. And the Vietnamese would tell him often, they would say, hey, tell us what you know. Help us, because America is a horrible place. You can't even sit in the same diner as your counterparts who are here with you. You can't even go to the same clubs, the same bars. You can't drink at the same installations. You can't drink out of the same water fountain even. Like, not only do you have segregated recreation, you have segregated life necessities. You have segregated bathrooms. Your country doesn't love you. Your country doesn't even like you. So why do you hold this great value for a country that doesn't treat you the same? And you know what Major Fred Cherry did? I can tell you what he did. He stood strong and he didn't crack. He didn't break. He never succumbed to the thought that our country was horrible. He said, there are people around me who are surviving. There are people back home. There are people at the base where I was flying out of that are counting on me, not to tell them of the security posture, not to tell them where the fences are located, not to tell them how many guards we have and what time they change shift, not to tell them, our current capabilities in our aircraft. It's our responsibility. It's my responsibility to have faith in my fellow service members, because my fellow service members want me to be alive. They want to stay alive, and it's our job to work together. We are a team regardless. And Major Fred Cherry did not crack under the difficulties of his circumstances. He did not allow his circumstances to dictate his outcome. And in fact, he believed in the team of people around him so that he could make great progress, so that he could return alive. And there was great opposition for him. There was great change. There was great difficulty, but he was committed to being unified with his teammates. And so number one, we've talked about being willing and committed to finishing strong. And we talked about Lance P. Sijan. Number two, we talked about owning your patch of grass. The gentleman who blinked his way to informing the United States about the circumstances that he was in and not saying it's someone else's job. And then we talked about Major Fred Cherry, believing in the team of people around you. And he was absolutely committed to that. And lastly, I would say be proactive with your access and influence. Every one of these people had the opportunity to say, I'm going to roll over and die in the Hanoi Hilton. And I can tell you what they did collectively. They invented a tap code where they had a 5x5 grid and effectively assigned all of the letters A through Z, and they left out one letter that had a double sound. I think it was the Q. And they used the K because the K and the Q had similar sounds. I could be wrong. Someone can fact check me on that, but I'm pretty sure. So 5x5 grid. And so they would tap one across, one down. Tap, tap. That's an A. One across, two down. Or let's go one across, or two across, one down would be a B. And so it would be bop, bop, bop. And then you would have a B. And they have invented this in isolation. Somebody invented it and then taught the tap code to their neighbors across the neighboring prison lines, across the neighboring prison walls. And they were able to tap and communicate all hours of the night without using their voices, as they would have their ears pressed up to the wall. And these people were committed to communicating, and they were proactive with their access and influence. And they said, hey, this is the senior leader. This is the chain of command. Do not break. You're going to go into a hard session. It's going to be difficult. You need some food. We're going to leave some notes for you in the bathroom. And they said the access and influence They were able to establish a hierarchy. They were able to establish discipline. They were able to establish opportunities for themselves to have hope in the midst of a changing environment. And so when I think about our unity and our need to operate in this changing environment, how do we create change? How do we stick together? How do we press forward in the midst of a place where half of us don't agree with the other half? How do we do that? Well, we lead. We lead with integrity, and we lead by doing these 4 things that we talked about. Number 1, commit to finishing strong. If you have to scoot your way to evade the enemy for over 6 weeks, you do it. Believe in the team of people around you. If you want to be like Major Fred Cherry and say, hey, they're counting on me and I'm counting on them, and I'm going to do my best to create the change that is required. I'm going to hold strong, hold fast to the truths and principles that I believe in. Do it as a leader. Number 3, own your own patch of grass. There's a man who blinked his way to helping people understand the environment and the depravity that these people were living in. And he conveyed messages and helped drive change. And then lastly, be proactive with your access and influence. Create the structure, create the infrastructure, use what you have accessible to you within the confines of your responsibility to add value to your environment. And when I look at the POWs of Vietnam, they had a very difficult environment. It was very, very difficult. And we are living in a place where it's certainly not as difficult as that, but change is real. And I would charge you to take stock of what you can do, because we are not helpless and we have a clear opportunity to be impactful. I'd like to thank you so much for taking a listen to America's Heroes Group tonight. I am Jennifer-Ruth Green, but I thank Mr. Kelly. I thank all of the people who are behind the scenes making this happen, because it is an incredible time for us as Americans to come together. It's an incredible time for us as military members to understand how we can be more impactful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome